Before we get to this week's episode, I'd like to remind you all that my book, The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, is available through most major bookstores. It would be lovely if you would purchase it through the Jessica Kingsley Publishers website. Just do a little Google. It's a great book for people brand new to non-monogamy or people who have tried it for a while and need a little bit more structure. You can head to nonmonogamyhelp.com/book for more details and to show an interest in the audiobook, which would be really, really helpful to me. If you've bought it and read it, please give it a rating or review on Amazon. If you don't mind, that's also very helpful. Thank you so much for your support. Let's get to this week's episode.
Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 92 of the Non-Monogamy Help podcast. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll either be read in the podcast or the column anonymously. You're more than welcome to choose which you'd prefer. If you want to read the columns and listen to all the podcasts, you can go to nonmonogamyhelp.com, subscribe to the email newsletter by going to go.nonmonogamyhelp.com/email, and you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at nonmonogamyhelp. If you want to support the columns and the podcast, please consider becoming a patron. Even $1 a month helps support the daily running of the columns and the podcasts, and it shows me a general vote of support. I really appreciate it. You can do that by going to patreon.com/Lola Phoenix, and if you donate $5 or more a month, your name, with your permission, will be read at the end of the podcast. Now, let's get to this week's discussion question. If this is the first episode you're listening to, every week before I read the letter, I put forth a discussion question that you can use with your friends, partners, or anyone else you want to get to know a little bit more. I also answer it myself briefly to give you a little bit of context. This week's discussion question is, how do you feel about long-distance relationships? I think for me, I don't necessarily mind long distance as much as some people do. I think it just depends on a lot of other factors, but I don't necessarily mind things being a little bit long distance. It depends is my answer, but it's definitely not a complete no for me. I think that, I don't know, one of my first relationships ever started as a long distance relationship, and I definitely was really not insecure about it, but I just was, very shy about telling people about it because I didn't want people to basically tell me how I felt about this person. So because I've dealt with a lot of, how do I put this in like a not traumatizing way or like less intense? Basically, because I've dealt with so much negative environments growing up, so many negative environments, I have a baseline where being long distance is okay, because even my first relationship, having someone who wasn't physically there but still supported me was a lot more than I had in my life in the past, so I didn't necessarily notice a huge gap. It in fact felt like really great. So that sounds really sad, but it's the truth. So that's why I'm kind of fine with long distance at some points. So yeah. Anyway, let me repeat the discussion question again. How do you feel about long distance relationships? Let's get to this week's letter. My ex, 33 male, just broke up with me, 22 female, after I visited him in the US. He didn't break up with me while I stayed with him, but he broke up with me after I came back to my country on the phone. We were in a long-distance relationship for 1 year, and he doesn't want to do online date nights or text frequently anymore because he feels forced. I met him in Australia 2 years ago. I usually went to his place once or twice a week. We didn't really discuss our relationship, but I really liked him, and he said, "Do you like being my girl?" by voice chat, so I thought I was dating him at the time, but he had been seeing some girls as well, which he had never mentioned. When he left Australia, he asked me if I wanted to continue the relationship. I said yes and asked him, "Are you my boyfriend?" And he said yes. So we started dating officially. Also, he wrote a letter that said, "I've never liked anyone as much as I like you," even though he married twice. He had divorced already, though. After he went back to the US, he started to hike the Appalachian Trail, and he started ignoring my texts and stopped contacting me. We talked about me visiting him and going hiking together before he started hiking, but he said it's not a good idea because hiking is too tough. Then he suggested me to see other people, and he told me that he is now seeing a girl on the trail. When he mentioned about her, he described her as quote-unquote just a hiking thing. After that, he said he wanted to try a polyam relationship. This is the first time I heard about polyamory from him, but later he told me he was solo polyam in Australia, which I didn't know. I still really liked him, so I decided to try a polyam relationship, but I was struggling with jealousy and insecurity, probably because I didn't see him for a year, and he had the girl from the trail live in the same city. But anyway, finally, I would be able to visit him in the US and stay for a few weeks. I really enjoyed spending time with him. We went to a lot of places and had wonderful dinner, and when we went out, he used his phone a lot, and I wasn't sure if he was enjoying it or not. And one time, I saw him texting his other partner when we went on a date. I felt like he cannot stop thinking of other partners even when we are on a date. Also, once he told me that he doesn't use his phone when he is with someone, but when he's with me, he uses his phone a lot. I wasn't sure if I am his important person or not, and then I felt insecure about it. I wasn't so mature, and I cried a lot because of my insecurities. I should have told him how I felt more, but it's too late. I wanted to continue this relationship even when we are long distance, so I asked him what's it going to be like before I left. But he said it's going to be less cuddling, and we could talk about it later when you get back home. It was a painful flight, and I messaged him on the plane. I asked him that I want to know when I can see you again, and he said he hasn't known yet, but probably in Europe or my country. After I got back home, we talked on the phone. He asked me about my plan first. I told him that not seeing him for a year was too tough. I want to see you at least twice a year. Then he started talking about his thoughts. What he was saying is: 1, he doesn't want online dates or frequent texts because he feels forced. 2, he has been expecting me to be his vacation friend, not frequently talking with each other, but traveling together sometimes. 3, when we stayed together, I was so insecure and it was annoying. He lost interest in me. 4, staying in other countries for a few weeks costs a lot and he cannot do that. 5, if I can move to the US, he would like to see me again. 2, he has expected me to be his vacation friend, not frequently talking with each other, but traveling together sometime. Then he just broke up with me after I got back home. I paid for airplane, visa, COVID test. It's expensive, actually. Taxi from the airport to his place and his place to airport. Some souvenirs for him. And also, even though he is 11 years older than me, he is broke. So I tried not to be a burden financially. I got some lunch, dinner, drinks. I thought I did almost everything I could do for him, but I felt like I lost a lot of things: money, time, great memories. And I wish he broke up with me before I left the US, then I didn't have to drag these feelings into my country. Now I hate him so much. The more I hate him, the more I will become the person I don't want to be. I just want to know how to forget those memories and just move on. He promised that he wouldn't break up with me after my visit. I don't know why this guy could easily promise that he couldn't, but I should be glad to not be dragged by this guy anymore. What he did to me is not what non-monogamous people do, right? I'm interested in the lifestyle, but I don't know how to handle the current emotions and trust someone again. Before we get to this week's answer, I'm going to quickly plug this episode's sponsor, BetterHelp. Quite often in a lot of my columns and my podcasts, I encourage people to see a polyamory-friendly therapist. And to be honest, everyone should see a therapist, in my opinion. For a lot of people, looking locally for a therapist who may be supportive of polyamory can be impossible or out of their budget. BetterHelp allows you to find therapists online you can send messages to at any time of the day, and they do offer some financial aid. You can get 10% off your first month by using the promo code Non-Monogamy Help at checkout or going to betterhelp.com/non-monogamy help. Let's get to this week's answer. No. This is not what non-monogamous people do. This is what people who are kind of jerks do. And jerks can unfortunately come in all flavors. Non-monogamous, monogamous, any type of person in any type of quote-unquote lifestyle. I know it's a lifestyle. I just hate that word for personal reasons. Any kind of person can be a jerk. I would say that you were insecure, but you had a lot of reasons to be insecure. There are lots of things that could have happened to help you feel a little bit more secure in this relationship, both things you could have done and also things he could have done. But one big thing about this is that you beating yourself up about this by saying you weren't mature for crying is really, really not fair to yourself. You're allowed to have emotions, and regardless of whether you continue to be monogamous or be non-monogamous, you should be allowed to get upset without you beating yourself up in such a way. And maybe there's a problem with sort of English translation on this. That is possible. But saying that you were not being mature and just the way that you talked about being upset is really harsh on yourself. being polyamorous and being monogamous, being in any type of relationship is not about handling your emotions to the point where you don't have any. We have emotions, we have feelings, we are human beings, we're not Vulcans. We have feelings, and it's okay to have feelings, and it is not immature to be upset. So first thing, no matter what kind of relationship style you plan on continuing, please give yourself the permission to have feelings, because regardless of, all of the options that could have happened between you and this person, one thing is for absolutely certain: you need to allow yourself the permission to have feelings and not beat yourself up for them. He's allowed to be turned off by insecurity. If he said that you were annoying and your feelings were annoying and that turned him off, that is a jerk way of saying that. There are better ways to deal with it. And you know what? If he doesn't want, and some people are interested in non-monogamy because they can have sex and have some amount of romance in their lives without necessarily taking on the responsibility of what I call emotional management. So they can be, there's a thing called comet partners, and that's a person that just sort of comes in and out of people's lives and maybe hangs out with them for a bit, maybe is a kind of friends with benefits situation, doesn't have to go to your parents' funeral with you, doesn't have to have any emotional responsibility. And if both people consent to that, that is 100% fine. The problem that I have is when somebody assumes this role without informing the people, or is so unaware of themselves that they are doing this and think that that's polyamory, and just go about their lives as if people who have any kind of emotional expectations of them are immature or insecure, or they're the problem. And it's not the case, okay? I find it really, really bizarre that he suddenly mentions polyamory to you and then says he was solo polyamory when he was in Australia, and you find out that he was seeing other people. Granted, it didn't really seem like you were very clear with each other about whether or not your relationship was actually a quote-unquote relationship, and that gets really dicey because, yes, on the one hand, I do think that most people are monogamous. So if you are kind of flirting with the boundaries around, are we a thing, are we not a thing, there needs to be some clarification there, because most people will expect being a quote-unquote thing or being in a relationship to being monogamous. And if you have no intention of doing that, purely for the sake of STI risk and being clear about sexual health, you should be clear with people that you're sleeping with that you're also sleeping with other people, just so that they can assess their risk. And I don't really buy from this guy that, oh, I was solo polyamory and now I want to try polyamory with you. I don't know. I don't really necessarily buy that. But I do think it sounds like this guy wanted something more casual, and maybe there were opportunities for you to break this off way before it got to this point. Like when you found out that he was sleeping with other people in Australia without telling you, you could have been like, okay, I don't really like the fact that I wasn't told about this, and that could have been the end of it. But I understand why you kept going, because you liked this person and you wanted to see where it went. And also, he could have told you. I feel like there were times when you assumed that there were exclusivity feelings from him when there weren't. And there were times when it seemed like he was able to have his cake and eat it too, and so he's not going to mess that up. It's okay for him to want to have less serious things and flings. I feel like it probably was clear that you weren't interested in that. Like, it doesn't really seem like you are actually interested in that. You were willing to try polyamory, but only for the sake of keeping this relationship, not necessarily because you had any interest in it. And I feel like, okay, so he found your insecurities quote unquote annoying, which, by the way, if he really said that, really gets on my nerves. But it was very clear that this wasn't something that you necessarily were that gung-ho about. And I do feel like for anyone who's interested in polyamory and is in a monogamous relationship or some relationship of any type, if they are introducing it to somebody and somebody is trying it for the first time, mostly for the sake of keeping the relationship, you would expect the person to be super anxious and super insecure. It's to be expected. So again, it's not a problem that he doesn't want to have a serious relationship with you. It sucks that he didn't cut you off. But equally, I also think that you put up with some of this for way too long. He was kind of a jerk. I don't think that he was very clear. I think he allowed the sort of mystique of the situation and some of his excuses of, oh, I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail and blah, blah, I think he allowed some of that to obscure what it is that he was doing, and I think he wanted to have his cake with you and eat it too, and the fact that, like, I wish that I could, like, hug you, because the fact that he's broke, and you flew over there, and you paid for shit, and put yourself out there, and, like, he didn't seem to, it doesn't seem like from your letter, he seemed to acknowledge even the fact that you were basically out of pocket, or that there was some kind of inequality in that situation. There was a lot that you put into that, and there were moments when you could have stepped back. Now, that doesn't mean that's acceptable in terms of, like, it doesn't mean that it's okay for him to be a jerk because you went along with it maybe longer than you should. He's still a jerk. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily think there's anything you can do about that at this point. I think that in the future, use this as an opportunity, use this as a kind of learning point to demand more clarity for yourself. If you're not sure if you're in a relationship with someone, or if you're not sure, demand that clarity from them. I would also say be very, very cautious, and I feel like you brought this up for a reason, around people who say things like, I don't like anybody else except you, especially if those people are polyamorous. Now, sometimes people say things like that because it's very reassuring at times, and it's the sort of thing that you hear in films, and people like to say that because, and it might be true. I'm not denying that some people will, have sort of relationships where they don't fully click with someone, and then they find someone they truly click with, and then, they do have that experience. But just be very, very wary of anyone who puts you on a pedestal, just because even if they're doing it for the reasons of trying to reassure you and make you feel better, I feel like anytime somebody puts you in the position of most valuable partner, MVP, you will understandably have a lot of anxiety about that, because if there's only one person that he feels super strongly about, then as much as you may be in that spot now, you can be replaced. And then it also creates these comparisons, like you were saying, of, like, he said he doesn't text anyone when he's on a date with me, or when he's on dates with people, but yet he's texting people while we're on dates. So that kind of thing doesn't help. But in the future, like, remember this situation and try and use it to demand more clarity for yourself. If you're wanting to explore non-monogamy, that's fine. But I think that in general, regardless of whatever relationship style you choose, it would be helpful for you to be able to assert your needs a little bit more, and to understand that, and I really, really relate to you right now. I'm not going to go into my personal life, but I really relate to you. It is extremely difficult to step away from a situation where you very, very much like somebody, but they are not giving you what you need. And it is very, very, very easy to allow the feelings you have about them to wash away temporarily all of your needs and your concerns, and, like, yeah, but I can deal with it because I like this person. It's very, very, very easy to do that. And it's very, very, very hard. It's very easy to step away from someone who's a dickhead. It's very easy to step away from someone who's a jerk. and this guy is kind of a jerk, like, in my opinion. But, when you have your love goggles on, it's hard to see that someone is treating you badly. But if somebody isn't actually treating you all that badly, and I'm saying this because it will get more complicated than this, you might meet somebody who is not as much of a jerk as this guy, but still wants to have these types of less serious flings things, and it will be very, very tempting for you to just go along with it just so you can keep this person in your life. And it takes a lot to learn how to go, you know what, I know I really like you and I really, really want to be with you. And there is a huge part of me that says, I know that this isn't the type of relationship that I want, but I'm willing to go with it because I think that this temporary happiness will last forever, and it won't, and it sucks. So being able to assert your needs, being able to know, and maybe you didn't necessarily know. You were trying polyamory. Sometimes you don't know what you need until you're not getting it. But being able to assert that and being able to say, like, okay, I would like someone who doesn't text people when we're on dates together. Can you please do that? I would like someone who actually wants to be in a committed relationship and likes to define that clearly. Are you willing to do that? I would like someone who is willing to talk about the economics of the situation that we're in. You don't have a lot of money, but I don't necessarily want to pay for everything. You are not a burden, and anyone who makes you feel like you are a burden to them, like, I don't know if he said that, if he said that you're a burden, like, or you said you didn't want to be a financial burden to him. A partnership should be a place where you should be able to come into that and say, okay, I know you don't have a lot of money, but I also don't have a lot of money, so how are we going to work this out? Like, you have to be able to say that, and if you can't talk about that, then, and whether that's because he is kind of putting up walls, or it's also a little bit of yourself being scared to scare him away, you have to be able to assert your needs a little bit more. And I think that you are going to find relationships of any kind a little bit difficult if you're unable to do that, because you're going to go along with stuff that doesn't actually suit you because you're too afraid to scare that other person off. And it's okay. It's a very human thing. Please don't beat yourself up about this. It's a lesson that even myself, I am still trying very much to learn. Like, I wish that every single person who was not fully compatible with me was just a total jerk, because then it would be so much easier to just be like, bleh. But it's not. It's really hard, and it will get harder when you meet people who don't fully meet your needs. So it'll take some time. It's not an overnight process. You're also only 22, so it makes sense that you feel a little bit of a more difficult time asserting your needs. You will get there, but I think that this situation, it's very unfortunate. He was kind of a jerk, but it's something that you can use as a reminder of why it's really important for you to step away from situations that don't serve you. Lastly, I have to say, if you are interested in non-monogamy still, I would check out the 101 and 102 articles I have on nonmonogamyhelp.com. If you're interested, that will give you a kind of springboard to examine what might interest you about non-monogamy, because the thing that I think is really important is having a personal reason for being interested in non-monogamy. And a lot of people, I fully acknowledge this, a lot of people don't know about non-monogamy, get introduced to it when they're in a relationship, and their primary reason for wanting to try it is to save a relationship that otherwise might be ended. However, I think that it's really, really important to find a personal reason to be interested in non-monogamy, and you might have that reason. So if you check out those articles, you might get to learn a bit more about, like, what you should think about, what you might be interested in, and then you can kind of explore if non-monogamy is for you. But yeah, to sum up, no, this isn't what non-monogamous people do. I definitely feel like this guy has been a jerk to you in many, many ways. you were insecure. You had a lot of valid reasons to be insecure, and you beating yourself up about having feelings isn't fair to yourself. And I very, very much hope you take the biggest lesson from this, and that you're allowed to have emotions. You're allowed to have feelings. I feel like this guy wanted something more casual, and there were boundaries he didn't make clear and boundaries that you could have made clearer. And yeah, I overall, yeah, he's definitely a jerk, and you not really sure how to put down some of these boundaries doesn't excuse his behavior. But I'm hoping that learning about this and thinking about this situation might help you in the future be able to set down those boundaries. And I'm sorry that you went through this, because this sounds like an absolute pain in the ass, and you don't deserve to have gone through this. Last but not least, if you want to explore non-monogamy, do check out those resources. Have a think about it. No matter what, I think that you will get better from this. Things will get better. It sucks right now. I'm, again, so sorry that you went through this. I'm really angry on your behalf. I really want to give you a hug when you were saying like that you didn't want to be a burden to him, and you'd done so much, and you were annoying, and you were immature by crying. Like, no, no, you weren't. It's okay for you to have feelings. And I really hope that things get better from here on out. And I really, really want things to be well with you. And people don't generally follow up. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But take this as definite invitation to send me a message later on, because I think part of your letter was just you telling somebody about this happening to you, and that is absolutely fine. But please check in later on and let me know how things are going for you. And I genuinely hope that they get better, and I do think they will get better from here on out. I hope this helps, and good luck. Thank you for listening to episode 92 of Non-Monogamy Help. If you want to be awesome, you can donate to my Patreon. I have a Patreon. Please give it some money. Donating $5 or more a month with your name, good Lord. Donating $5 or more means your name with your permission will be read at the end of the podcast. This week's current awesome people are Laura Boylan, Chris Albury-Jones, Juke, Ellen Robertson, Nikki Jones, James Wartell, Leo Yucky, and Tyler Teetno. If for whatever reason you can't become a patron, because I get it, and I don't mean to make you feel guilty, and I understand that we live in a capitalist society and not everybody has the money, and that's fine. If you can take 5 minutes to log into iTunes, find the podcast, rate and review it, that would be really helpful. It helps some type of algorithm. It does something. Trust me, it is. And also, apparently some people can rate podcasts on Spotify. I have not seen this. Maybe this is an American only thing, but please, wherever you can, rate and review, and let me know, because I don't get any blipping notifications from Apple when people do reviews, and they actually make me feel really great, and I really appreciate them. So yeah, whatever you can do, I super appreciate it. That's all for this week. You will get a new column next Friday and another podcast episode in a fortnight. Thank you again for listening. You've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. The music was done by Chris Albury-Jones at albury-jones.com. Our podcast art was done by Dom Young at domduong.com. Thank you again for listening.